They were laughing when I couldn't even breathe. The house was full of music, clinking glasses, and applause for her while I stood in black, still learning how to survive my grief. No one asked why my hands were shaking. No one noticed I hadn't eaten in days. They said it was a celebration, and that I should be happy for her. They said grief had an expiration date. I remember thinking that silence was safer than explaining pain to people who had already chosen a side. What I didn't know then was that the truth doesn't disappear just because it's ignored. It waits. It listens. And sometimes it speaks through the smallest voice in the room. One sentence, said softly, said without malice. Spoken by my child who didn't understand money, power, or family politics. Just honesty. That sentence would force me to look back at everything I had signed, everything I had lost, and everything they celebrated while I was breaking. This isn't a story about revenge. It's about what happens when the truth finally gets tired of being quiet. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your city and local time in the comments. It helps me feel less alone telling this story. And if you believe that quiet people deserve to be heard too, consider subscribing. You never know which story might remind you that standing still is sometimes how justice begins. I used to believe families were built on instinct, that when something broke inside you, the people who shared your blood would feel it too. I was wrong. My name is Claire. I'm 34 years old and I live in a quiet suburb outside Columbus, Ohio. The kind of place with trimmed lawns, school buses that arrive at the same minute every morning, and neighbors who wave but never ask questions. For most of my life, I tried to be invisible enough to fit in, especially in my own family. My younger sister Megan was everything I wasn't: confident, loud, effortlessly admired. Where I hesitated, she stepped forward. Where I explained, she declared. My parents used to joke that Megan was born knowing how to win. They said it with pride, like it was a genetic miracle. When I got straight A's, they nodded. When Megan failed a class but charmed her way through summer school, they applauded her resilience. Growing up, I learned early that fairness wasn't part of our family language. Survival was. I survived by being agreeable, by not needing too much, by learning how to swallow disappointment before it showed on my face. By the time I was 23, I was married. Not to someone impressive, not to someone my parents bragged about, just a steady man named Daniel who worked construction and spoke softly when he was tired. They tolerated him. Megan, meanwhile, married fast and well, a man with a polished resume, a clean smile, and the kind of job title people repeated with admiration. At family dinners, conversations tilted naturally toward her life. I listened. I always listened. Then, 3 years ago, everything stopped. Daniel died on a rainy Tuesday morning. A highway accident. One phone call. One sentence that split my life into before and after. I don't remember screaming. I remember sitting on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets, staring at a crack in the tile that I had never noticed before. My son Evan was 5 at the time. He stood in the doorway holding his backpack, asking why Daddy wasn't taking him to school. Grief doesn't arrive like a wave. It arrives like fog. Thick. Silent. Everywhere. The weeks after the funeral blurred together. Cards arrived. Meals dropped off. Then slowly people returned to their lives. I didn't. I stayed stuck in that kitchen, in that crack in the tile, in the echo of a voice that was suddenly gone. My parents helped at first, but their patience thinned quickly. They suggested therapy, then suggested I was dwelling. Megan told me grief was a mindset, that staying strong was a choice. I went back to work earlier than I should have. I needed the paycheck. I needed routine. I needed something that didn't remind me of the empty side of the bed. At night, after Evan fell asleep, I cried quietly into a pillow so he wouldn't hear. I learned how to function while hollow. 6 months after Daniel's death, Megan announced her promotion. A senior role. A significant salary increase. A new office downtown. My parents were ecstatic. They planned a dinner. Not a small one. A real celebration. Invitations sent. Reservations made. They called me to let me know the date. I don't think I can, I said carefully. That weekend is hard for me. My mother sighed. Not unkindly, just tired. Claire, you can't avoid life forever. Megan's worked hard for this. I didn't argue. I rarely did. I told myself I could handle one night, that I would smile, eat politely, leave early, that it was easier than explaining why my chest still felt like it was caving in. The day of the dinner, I stood in front of my closet for a long time. Black felt too heavy. Color felt dishonest. I chose something simple, neutral, safe. Evan watched me from the bed, swinging his legs. "Is this a happy dinner?" he asked. "It's a family dinner," I said. He nodded, satisfied. Children accept vague answers better than adults. When we arrived, the restaurant was loud. Laughter bounced off the walls. Someone had ordered champagne. Megan stood near the center, glowing already mid-story. When she saw us, she smiled briefly, then turned back to her audience. I hugged my parents. My mother whispered, "Try to enjoy yourself," like it was advice, not an expectation. Throughout the night, Megan's achievements were recited like scripture. Her salary, her office view, her future. I clapped when everyone else did. Evan sat quietly beside me, coloring on the kids' menu. No one asked how we were doing. No one mentioned Daniel. It was as if my grief had become an inconvenience, something better left unacknowledged. At one point, Megan raised her glass and said, "I'm just so grateful for all the support. Family is everything." Everyone cheered. I felt something tighten inside me, not anger, not yet. Something closer to resignation. The realization that I was alone in a room full of people who shared my last name. That night wasn't the worst moment of my life. Not even close. But it was the moment something shifted. Something subtle. I began to understand that my pain wasn't invisible to them. It was irrelevant. I paid the bill for my share quietly. I gathered Evan's jacket. As we stood to leave, Megan finally looked at me. "You okay?" she asked, already distracted. "I will be," I said. It was the truth. I just didn't know how yet. The weeks after that dinner settled into a quiet routine that felt heavier than chaos. I woke before dawn, packed Evan's lunch, drove him to school, then went to my job at a small insurance office where no one asked personal questions. I answered emails, processed claims, smiled when required. Grief became something I folded neatly and placed in a drawer each morning, only to take it out again at night when the house went still. Megan's celebration didn't end at the restaurant. Photos appeared online, her smiling between my parents' glasses, raised captions filled with congratulations. Friends commented. Colleagues shared. My mother reposted one with the words, "So proud of our girl." I stared at that sentence longer than I should have. Not because it was untrue, but because it felt complete. As if the family story no longer had room for footnotes. A week later, my parents called again. Another gathering. This time at their house. A small get-together, they said. Just family. I hesitated, then agreed. Avoidance had only taught them that my absence was manageable. I thought presence might remind them I still existed. When we arrived, the driveway was already full. Inside, the house buzzed with voices. Megan was there, of course, talking, laughing, holding court. Evan stayed close to me, his fingers wrapped around mine. He had learned instinctively when to stay quiet. At dinner, the conversation followed a familiar path. Megan's job, Megan's plans, Megan's future. Someone asked her about buying a new house closer to the city. My father leaned forward, eager, already offering advice. I chewed slowly, tasting very little. Halfway through the meal, my mother finally turned to me. "So Claire," she said brightly, "how's work?" It wasn't concern. It was courtesy. A box to check. "It's fine," I said. The safest answer. She nodded, relieved, and turned back to Megan. Later, as plates were cleared, Megan stood and tapped her glass. "I just want to say something," she announced. The room quieted. "I know this year hasn't been easy for everyone, but I hope we can all move forward together. Life doesn't stop, you know." Her eyes flicked toward me just briefly. Long enough for the message to land. Life doesn't stop. I felt my face heat. Not because I disagreed, but because the sentence was a dismissal wrapped in encouragement, the kind that made objecting feel unreasonable. I said nothing. Silence had become my default language. After dessert, Evan wandered toward the living room where his old toys were stored in a basket by the fireplace. He knelt on the rug, quietly building something out of plastic blocks. I watched him from the kitchen doorway, grateful for the normalcy of his focus. Then my mother's voice cut through the room. "Megan, did you tell them about the bonus?" Megan laughed. "Oh, it's nothing." But she told them anyway. The number floated in the air, heavy and impressive. People gasped. Compliments followed. I felt the familiar pressure behind my eyes, the kind that warned me tears were close. I excused myself to the bathroom and locked the door. I sat on the edge of the tub and breathed slowly until the moment passed. I reminded myself why I was there. For Evan. For peace. For the illusion of family, if nothing else. When I returned, the mood had shifted slightly. Lighter, louder, Someone suggested a toast to success, to new beginnings. Glasses were poured again. That was when my father looked at me and said, "Claire, you should take notes. Megan's really figured things out." The words landed harder than he intended. Or maybe exactly as intended. I forced a smile. "I'm proud of her," I said. And I was. In a distant, abstract way. Pride didn't erase pain, but it could exist alongside it. As the night wore on, the conversation grew careless. Someone joked about how some people let grief hold them back. Another mentioned how hard it must be to be a single mom, as if I weren't sitting right there. Each comment chipped away at something inside me. I stayed. I listened. I endured. Eventually, it was time to leave. I gathered. Evan thanked my parents, hugged them quickly. Megan gave me a brief squeeze, perfunctory. "Try to smile more," she said quietly. "It makes people uncomfortable." I nodded. Habit. In the car, Evan was quiet. The streetlights blurred past as I drove. When we reached a red light, he spoke. "Mom," he said softly. "Yes, why do they clap for Aunt Megan but not for you?" The question was simple, unfiltered, honest. I swallowed. "People clap for different things," I said carefully. He considered this. "You're brave," he said. "You don't cry in front of them." The light turned green. I drove on my hands, steady on the wheel, my chest tight. Children see what adults pretend not to. I wondered what else he had noticed. At home, after I tucked him into bed, I sat alone in the living room. The house felt too quiet, the silence pressing in from all sides. I replayed the night in my mind, the words, the looks, the way my grief had been politely pushed aside to make room for celebration. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel something beyond sadness. A question. Not why me, but what did I miss? I didn't know it then, but that question would change everything. Not because it made me stronger overnight. Not because it gave me answers immediately. But because it meant I was no longer willing to disappear. After that night, something in me shifted, not dramatically, not in a way anyone else could see. There was no confrontation, no declaration, just a quiet withdrawal. I stopped answering group messages right away. I declined invitations with polite excuses. I told myself it was temporary, that I needed space to heal. The truth was simpler. I was tired of being present in rooms where my pain was treated like an inconvenience. Life narrowed to essentials. Evan. Work. Home. Sleep when it came. I learned how to stretch groceries, how to budget down to the last dollar, how to keep the lights on without asking anyone for help. I didn't want their sympathy. I didn't trust it anymore. My parents noticed eventually. My mother called one afternoon while I was folding laundry. "You've been distant," she said. Not unkindly, just observant. "Is something wrong?" I looked at Evan on the floor, lining up his toy cars with careful precision. "I'm just busy," I said. There was a pause. "Megan's been worried about you." That almost made me laugh. Almost. "She thinks you're isolating yourself," my mother continued. "That it's not healthy." I thought about the dinners, the toasts, the applause, the way no one had asked how I was surviving on half a salary while paying daycare and rent, the way grief had been framed as a personal failure. "I'm managing," I said, and ended the call. The next time I saw my family was not by choice. It was my father's birthday, a milestone, 70. A big deal, according to my mother. She insisted I come. Just for a bit, she said. It would mean a lot to him. I agreed because guilt is persuasive, and because Evan loved his grandfather. I told myself I could endure one afternoon. The house was already full when we arrived. Decorations hung crookedly taped in place by someone who had rushed. The smell of food filled the air. People greeted us warmly enough, but their attention drifted quickly back to Megan, who stood near the kitchen island, animated as ever. She had changed since her promotion. Not just in clothes or confidence, but in posture. She stood like someone who expected to be listened to. And she was. At one point, I overheard her telling a cousin about a tough decision she had made earlier that year. About cutting financial ties with people who were dragging her down. "I had to protect my future," she said. "You can't save everyone." I froze. The words felt too familiar. Like echoes of conversations I barely remembered from a time when my head had been underwater and I had signed things just to make the noise stop. Documents. Agreements. Papers Megan had insisted were temporary solutions. I shook the thought away. Grief distorts memory. I reminded myself of that. The afternoon wore on. Evan played in the yard with his cousins. I sat on the porch, listening to fragments of conversation float past me. Someone mentioned a property. Another mentioned an account. Numbers were thrown around casually, like trivia. I noticed how often Megan's name followed the word smart. Eventually, cake was served, candles lit. Everyone gathered around my father as he smiled, overwhelmed and pleased. When the song ended, Megan leaned forward and kissed his cheek. "None of this would be possible without you," she said loudly. "You taught me everything." Applause followed. I clapped too, softly. After cake, my father motioned for me to join him in the living room. He gestured for Evan to stay outside. The door closed behind us. "You seem different," he said. He wasn't accusing, just stating a fact. Distant. "I'm tired," I said. He nodded as if that explained everything. "You know Megan means well." I didn't answer. "She's always looked out for the family," he continued. "She's made sacrifices." I thought of the papers, the signatures, the way she had shown up at my door weeks after Daniel's funeral, efficient and composed, talking about accounts and responsibilities, while I struggled to remember how to breathe. "She said you agreed," my father added. At the time, I looked at him then, really looked. Agreed to what? He frowned, confused. The arrangement? About the funds? The house insurance? The management? My heart began to pound. What arrangement? His expression shifted. Something like uncertainty crept in. "Megan said you asked her to handle things, that you didn't want the burden." I felt dizzy. The room tilted slightly as if the floor had lost its balance. I remembered sitting at my kitchen table, paperwork spread out, Megan's voice steady as she explained what I couldn't deal with right now. I remembered nodding, signing, trusting. "I didn't understand," I said slowly. "I wasn't in a state to understand." He sighed. "Claire, you can't keep blaming grief. At some point, responsibility." I stood up. My legs felt weak, but they held. "I need to go." "Now?" he asked, surprised. "Yes." Outside, the air felt sharp against my skin. Evan ran up to me, smiling, holding a paper plate with half-eaten cake. "Are we leaving?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "We are." In the car, I drove in silence, my mind racing. Pieces began to shift, to realign. Conversations, documents, Megan's sudden financial leap, the timing, the confidence. At a stop sign, Evan spoke. "Mom," he said. "Aunt Megan told Grandpa that the house money was hers because you didn't want it." I gripped the steering wheel. "When did she say that?" "Today," he said. "When you were inside." My chest tightened. "What exactly did she say?" He thought for a moment. "She said you were too sad to take care of it, that you signed it away." I pulled over to the side of the road and turned off the engine. My hands were shaking now. Not from grief, from clarity. Evan watched me carefully. "Did you?" he asked. I closed my eyes. "I don't know," I said honestly. But for the first time since Daniel died, I knew what I needed to do next. That night, after Evan fell asleep, I pulled the old file box out from the back of my closet. It was one of those plastic storage bins with a cracked lid, the kind you buy when you're overwhelmed and just need somewhere to put things you can't face yet. I had shoved it back there months earlier. Bank statements, insurance paperwork, legal forms from after Daniel's death. I told myself I would organize it later when my head was clearer. Later had arrived, whether I felt ready or not. I spread the papers across the dining table in uneven stacks. The overhead light flickered slightly, casting shadows that made everything feel heavier. I brewed coffee, even though it was already past midnight. Sleep wasn't coming anyway. At first, nothing jumped out. Dates, account numbers, official language designed to sound neutral, even kind. Then I noticed signatures, mine. Some were steady, others weren't. On several pages, my name looked wrong, letters slanted, spacing uneven, like they'd been written by someone whose hands didn't fully belong to her. I tried to remember signing them. Some I could recall vaguely, others not at all. One document caught my attention. A power of attorney form. Limited but broad enough to give Megan authority over financial decisions during a period of emotional incapacity. The phrase made my stomach twist. Emotional incapacity. I didn't remember those words. I remembered Megan saying, "This just lets me help you for a bit." I kept reading. There were transfers, accounts consolidated, insurance payouts redirected, not stolen, not in the way people imagine crime, but moved, managed, reassigned. All technically legal, all signed. I pushed back from the table and covered my face with my hands. For months I had blamed myself for struggling financially, for not bouncing back. I had assumed the problem was me, my weakness, my grief, my inability to function like everyone expected. But the numbers told a different story. Money that should have been cushioning our fall had never reached me. It had gone to Megan. I didn't cry. Not yet. I felt something colder settle in my chest. Not rage, recognition. I spent the next several days quietly retracing my steps. I requested copies of statements. I called the insurance company under the pretense of updating contact information. I asked careful questions. No accusations, no emotion. The answers came slowly, reluctantly, but consistently. Yes, the beneficiary had been changed. Yes, the authorization came from a valid signature. Yes, Megan had acted within the scope of the documents. Each yes landed like a small blow. At work, I functioned as usual. At home, I cooked, cleaned, helped Evan with homework. He noticed I was quieter than usual, but calmer too. Less hollow. I was moving with purpose now, even if I didn't fully understand where it would lead. One evening, while Evan was drawing at the table, he looked up at me. "Mom," he said, "are you mad at Aunt Megan?" I paused. "Why do you ask?" He shrugged. "You're thinking a lot." I considered my answer carefully. "I'm not mad," I said. "I'm trying to understand something." He nodded, satisfied with that. The following week, I scheduled a consultation with a lawyer. I chose someone outside my family's circle. No referrals, no favors. Her office was downtown in a building that smelled faintly of old carpet and coffee. She was in her early 40s, sharp-eyed, efficient. She listened without interrupting as I explained the situation, sliding copies of documents across the desk. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "You were grieving," she said. "Severely." "Yes." "And your sister assumed control of your finances during that time." "Yes." "Did she disclose the full implications of what you were signing?" I thought of Megan's calm voice, her assurances, the way she framed everything as temporary. "No," I said. The lawyer nodded slowly. "That matters." She explained the legal landscape carefully. That what Megan had done might not be criminal in the simplest sense, but it wasn't clean. There were ethical breaches, potential undue influence, especially given the timing. "You didn't contest it earlier," she said, "which makes things more complicated." "I didn't know," I replied. She met my eyes. "That also matters." I left the office with a list of next steps and a strange sense of relief. Not because justice was guaranteed, it wasn't, but because for the first time someone had acknowledged that something was wrong. At home, I didn't tell anyone. Not my parents. Not Megan. Silence had protected me once. Now it would serve a different purpose. Megan continued to thrive publicly. Another post. Another milestone. My mother sent me screenshots, proud updates I didn't respond to. I watched from a distance, noting the confidence with which Megan spoke about her investments, her foresight. I wondered how much of her success was built on my silence. A month later, the lawyer called. "We need to move quickly," she said. "There's a statute issue, and your sister is making additional transfers." My stomach dropped. "Can she do that?" "Not if we challenge the original authority," she said. "But timing matters." That night, after Evan was asleep, I sat alone again at the table. The same papers, the same light, but I wasn't the same person. I thought about the dinners, the applause, the way my grief had been framed as weakness, while Megan's efficiency had been praised as strength. I thought about my parents' unquestioning trust in her version of events. I didn't feel the urge to confront them. Not yet. I needed facts, documentation, leverage. The next step would change things, not all at once, but irrevocably. And for the first time, I didn't feel afraid of that. The sentence that changed everything didn't arrive with drama. It came on a quiet Tuesday night, folded into the ordinary. Evan was brushing his teeth while I stood in the doorway, reminding him not to rush. The bathroom light hummed softly. Outside rain tapped against the window with steady patience. It was the kind of evening that asked nothing of you, the kind that felt safe. He rinsed, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, then looked at me in the mirror. His eyes were serious in a way that didn't belong to a 7-year-old. "Mom," he said, "if someone takes care of your money when you're sad, do they have to give it back?" I felt my breath catch. "Why are you asking that?" He shrugged, a small movement. "Because Aunt Megan said she was helping you. But helpers give things back when you're better." I leaned against the doorframe. "What exactly did she say?" He turned, thinking carefully as if accuracy mattered. "She said you told her she could keep it. Because you didn't want to deal with it anymore." The room seemed to tilt just slightly. "And what do you think?" I asked. He frowned. "I think you were sad not gone. Sad not gone." The words landed with a clarity I hadn't felt since before Daniel died. Evan didn't understand contracts or legal thresholds. He didn't know about undue influence or fiduciary duty. But he understood something more basic. Consent requires presence. I tucked him into bed that night with a steadiness that surprised me. After he fell asleep, I sat at the edge of the mattress for a long time, listening to his breathing. The rain had stopped. The house felt alert, as if it knew something had shifted. The next morning, I began moving differently. I stopped questioning whether I was overreacting. I stopped wondering if this was my fault for being weak. I began to gather facts with intention, not anger, precision. At work, I requested a few personal days. I told my manager it was for family matters. She nodded, sympathetic, and approved them without asking questions. I used the time to make calls. I contacted the bank first. I asked for a complete transaction history from the month Daniel died to the present. I asked for notes on who had authorized changes. The representative was polite, careful. She told me some records would take time. I thanked her and hung up. Then I called the insurance company again. This time I asked to speak with a supervisor. I asked about beneficiary changes, how they were initiated, how they were confirmed. I took notes. Dates, names, procedures, patterns began to emerge. Changes were clustered. Days, not months after the funeral. Decisions made while I was still signing condolence cards and forgetting to eat. Megan had moved quickly, efficiently, with purpose. I wasn't surprised by that. What surprised me was how easy it had been. The lawyer called again midweek. "We're preparing to file," she said. "But there's something else." My stomach tightened. "What, your sister has listed assets that were never fully transferred to her," she said. "She's representing them as hers in negotiations. Is that legal?" "It depends on whether her authority still stands," the lawyer replied, "and whether there was full disclosure at the time of signing." I thought of Evan's sentence, sad, not gone. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Everything," she said. "Every email, every message, every witness who saw your state of mind." That afternoon, I opened my old email account, the one I had barely touched since Daniel's death. I scrolled through messages Megan had sent during that time. They were kind on the surface, supportive. But threaded through them was a subtle urgency. "Sign this today. We need to move fast. This will make things easier for everyone. For everyone." I forwarded the messages to my lawyer. Then I did something I hadn't planned to do yet. I called my mother. She answered on the second ring. "Claire, I need to ask you something," I said. My voice was steady. "When Megan told you about the financial arrangement, what exactly did she say?" There was a pause. "She said you didn't want to deal with it," my mother replied. "That you trusted her." "Did she say I understood it?" Another pause. "Longer." "She said you agreed." "That's not what I asked." Silence stretched between us. "No," my mother said finally. "She didn't say that." I closed my eyes. "Thank you." "Why are you asking this now?" she said, concern creeping in. "I'll explain later," I said. "I just needed to know." After I hung up, my phone buzzed almost immediately. Megan's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring. Then again. Then a text. "Are you talking to Mom about me?" I didn't respond. The next few days unfolded with a quiet intensity. My lawyer filed initial paperwork. Notices were sent. Requests for injunctions prepared. Nothing public yet. Nothing dramatic. Just the slow turning of gears. Megan called again. This time I answered. "What are you doing?" she asked, skipping pleasantries. "Why are lawyers contacting me? I'm asking questions," I said. "About what? About things I signed when I wasn't capable of understanding them." She scoffed. "You were fine. I was grieving." "That doesn't mean incompetent," she snapped. "No," I said calmly, "but it means vulnerable." She was quiet for a moment. Then her tone softened. "Claire, you're going to embarrass yourself. The family. Me." "I'm not trying to embarrass anyone," I said. "I'm trying to understand what belongs to my son." That did it. "Don't you dare bring Evan into this," she said sharply. "I didn't," I replied. "You did. When you used what was meant for him." She hung up. That night, Evan asked if everything was okay. "Yes," I said. And this time it felt closer to the truth. The sentence that changed everything wasn't an accusation. It wasn't a revelation wrapped in anger. It was a reminder. I had been sad, broken, lost, but I had not been gone. And now I was very much here. Once the paperwork was filed, everything slowed down and sped up at the same time. On the surface, nothing changed. I still woke before dawn, Still packed Evan's lunch. Still drove the same route to school, and then to work where I answered phones and processed claims like my life wasn't quietly tilting toward a legal storm. But underneath that routine, there was a current pulling me forward, steady and unavoidable. My lawyer warned me early, do not confront her, do not explain yourself, do not warn anyone. Silence protects your credibility, she said. Let the facts speak. I followed that advice with a discipline I didn't know I had. Megan, on the other hand, did not stay silent. She began calling daily, sometimes calm, sometimes furious, sometimes pretending nothing was wrong. You're misunderstanding things, she said in one voicemail. You're letting people put ideas in your head, she said in another. This will blow over if you just stop, she promised. I saved every message, forwarded every one to my lawyer. At work, I took lunches alone, scrolling through old calendars and digital folders. I reconstructed timelines when documents were sent, when signatures were requested, when funds moved. Patterns sharpened. Megan's efficiency hadn't been spontaneous. It had been planned. One afternoon, my lawyer called with a clipped urgency. We have a problem and an opportunity. My stomach tightened. Which is it, both, she said. Your sister has submitted statements to a third party claiming sole ownership of assets that were never fully transferred. That creates exposure. Exposure for her, yes. Especially if it's proven she knew the authority was questionable. I closed my eyes, steadying myself. What does that mean for us? It means we push forward. And it means this won't stay private much longer. The word public hung between us. I thought of my parents, of family gatherings, of applause and raised glasses, of how carefully Megan had curated her image. The idea of all of that unraveling in front of witnesses made my chest tighten, not with fear, but with a strange sadness. I'm ready, I said. The next step was a formal deposition request. When Megan received it, she exploded. She showed up at my house that evening without warning. I saw her car from the window and felt my body go still. Evan was in the living room, building something out of cardboard. I told him to take his project into his room and close the door. Why? He asked. Just for a bit, I said. Please. He nodded and disappeared down the hallway. When I opened the door, Megan didn't greet me. She walked in like she owned the place. Have you lost your mind? She demanded. I closed the door behind her calmly. You shouldn't be here. Oh, don't do that, she snapped. Don't pretend you're some fragile victim now. You signed everything. I didn't understand everything, I replied. She laughed, sharp and humorless. That's not my problem. The words hung there naked and ugly. I trusted you, I said quietly. She rolled her eyes. You trusted me because you didn't want responsibility, because you wanted someone else to handle it. That's not true. Then why did you sign? She challenged. I met her gaze. Because my husband had just died. Because I couldn't think straight. Because you told me it was temporary. Her jaw tightened. You're rewriting history. No, I said. I'm remembering it clearly for the first time. She stepped closer. Do you have any idea what this will do to me? To my career, I didn't move. Do you have any idea what it did to us? She faltered for just a second. Then her face hardened again. You're being selfish. That word used to break me. This time it didn't. I'm being careful, I said. There's a difference. She stared at me, searching for the sister she was used to, the one who apologized, who backed down. She didn't find her. You won't win, she said finally. People will believe me. I opened the door. This conversation is over. She hesitated, then walked out, slamming the door behind her. That night, after Evan was asleep, I sat alone and listened to the house settle. My hands were steady, my breathing even. The fear I expected didn't come. What came instead was resolve. The following weeks were a blur of preparation. Depositions scheduled, statements reviewed, witness lists assembled. My lawyer coached me carefully. Answer only what's asked, she said. No emotion, no commentary. I can do that, I replied. And I could. Because for the first time, my silence wasn't submission. It was strategy. Megan's deposition came first. I wasn't there, but I read the transcript afterward. Her confidence was unmistakable until it wasn't. She contradicted herself on dates, hesitated on explanations, brushed off questions that demanded precision. My lawyer highlighted sections in yellow. Here, she said, and here, and especially here. The cracks were forming. My turn came a week later. I sat in a neutral conference room, hands folded, answering questions under oath. I spoke about my mental state after Daniel's death, about sleepless nights, about trusting my sister, about not understanding the permanence of what I was signing. No accusations, just facts. When it was over, my lawyer nodded once. You did well. Outside, I sat in my car and let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for years. That evening, Evan asked if I was tired. A little, I said. He studied me, but not sad like before. I smiled. No, not like before. The investigation moved forward, quiet but relentless. Requests for records expanded. Third parties cooperated. The scope widened beyond what Megan had anticipated. And still, I said nothing to my family. I let the truth gather its weight. Soon it would no longer be something Megan could talk her way out of. The moment authority stepped in, the tone of everything changed. Until then, Megan had treated the situation like a family disagreement that had simply grown inconvenient. Something she could manage with pressure, guilt, or reputation. But once official notices were issued, once her employer received a request for records, once banks were compelled to respond, the story was no longer hers to control. It belonged to the system now. My lawyer called me early one morning. We've crossed a line, she said, from private dispute to formal review. I sat at the kitchen table, Evan, eating cereal across from me, unaware that his spoon, tapping against the bowl, marked the beginning of a new phase. What does that mean? I asked quietly. It means an external investigator has been assigned, she replied. And because of the amounts involved, it won't stay civil only. I felt a chill move through me, not fear but gravity. How public? She paused. Public enough. Megan found out before I told anyone. She called again, but this time her voice was different, tighter, controlled. Did you really bring outsiders into this? She asked. I didn't bring anyone, I said. I answered questions. You went too far, she snapped. This was family. So was what you did, I replied. She hung up without another word. Within days, requests expanded. My lawyer explained it carefully. When authority gets involved, it doesn't rush, but it doesn't stop either. They followed money trails, compared timelines, requested internal emails from Megan's workplace to assess whether she had misrepresented ownership or conflicts of interest. The investigation wasn't about feelings. It was about numbers, dates, signatures, scope of authority. And those things do not bend for charm. My parents sensed something was wrong before they knew what it was. My mother called her voice low. Your father received a call, she said. Someone asking about documents. About your sister. I know, I said. Why are people asking these questions now? I closed my eyes. Because they should have been asked earlier. She didn't argue. That silence told me more than words could. A week later, my parents asked to meet. Not at their house. Not somewhere familiar. They suggested a quiet cafe near the river neutral ground. I agreed. Megan wasn't there when I arrived. My parents sat stiffly, hands folded around their cups. My father spoke first. We didn't understand, he said. The extent of it. I didn't either, I replied. My mother's eyes were red. She told us she was protecting you. I nodded. That's what she told me too. They looked older than I remembered. Smaller. For the first time, the confidence they had placed in Megan seemed to falter. What happens now? My father asked. The process continues, I said. I don't control it. That seemed to frighten him more than any accusation. Megan arrived late, her posture rigid. She didn't sit at first. So this is how you wanted to do this, she said, eyes fixed on me. I didn't choose the method, I said. I chose the truth. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think this will end well for you. I think it will end honestly. She turned to our parents. You're just going to sit there. My mother looked between us. We want answers, she said quietly. Megan's mouth opened, then closed. She sat down, crossed her arms. They're exaggerating, she said. Claire's lawyer. They always do. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. 2 days later, Megan's employer placed her on administrative leave pending review. That was the moment the story became unavoidable. Word spread quickly through family, through social circles, through the polished professional world Megan had built so carefully. Questions surfaced. Invitations paused. Smiles became cautious. She called me that night, crying. You're ruining my life, she said. I listened. I didn't take anything from you, I said softly. I asked for what was mine. You could have handled this privately, she insisted. I tried, I said. By staying quiet, by trusting you. Her breathing hitched. You don't understand how this looks. I did understand, and that was the problem. Soon after my lawyer informed me, the The matter would be addressed in a public forum, a formal hearing related to fiduciary misuse tied to professional conduct. Not criminal court, not yet, but official, recorded, observed. Be prepared, she said. People will be there. The day of the hearing arrived gray and cold. I wore a simple suit, nothing dramatic. Evan stayed home with a friend. I didn't want him anywhere near it. The room was larger than I expected. Wood-paneled, rows of seats, a raised platform where officials would sit. Reporters lingered near the back, pretending not to stare. Megan sat across the room, surrounded by advisors. She looked smaller without an audience that adored her. When my name was called, I stood. I spoke when asked. No more, no less. I described my state after Daniel's death. The documents, the assurances, the outcomes. I didn't look at Megan. I didn't need to. Then the investigator spoke. Calm, precise. He referenced timelines, discrepancies, representations made by Megan in professional settings that conflicted with legal reality. Numbers appeared on screens, transfers, dates, gaps. Megan's counsel objected. The objections were noted and overruled. The room felt very still. When it was over, there was no verdict yet. Just a statement the review would continue with potential referrals. Outside cameras flashed. Questions were shouted. I walked past them without stopping. That night alone in my living room, I felt something loosen inside me. Not triumph, not relief, validation. For the first time since the celebrations began, since the applause drowned out my grief, the truth had been spoken aloud in a place that mattered. And it was no longer something Megan could silence. The hearing changed the temperature of every room Megan walked into. Before she had been the person people leaned toward, confident, admired, untouchable. After conversations stopped when she entered, smiles hesitated. Invitations disappeared without explanation. Nothing dramatic, just the quiet withdrawal of certainty. Reputation doesn't shatter all at once, it erodes. I felt that shift too, but from the opposite side. People began to look at me differently, not with pity, but with curiosity, with reconsideration. I stayed quiet. I didn't correct assumptions. I didn't offer my version unless asked. Silence still served me best. The next phase was unavoidable. The case had grown larger than internal reviews. The amount involved, the misrepresentations, the professional overlap, it all triggered a formal civil proceeding, open to the public, scheduled months in advance. My lawyer prepared me carefully. This will be the moment, she said, where everything is laid out. I nodded. I had known this was coming. My parents struggled during that time. My mother called often, asking how I was holding up. My father grew quieter. The pedestal they had built for Megan was cracking, and they didn't know where to stand without it. She's still your sister, my mother said once, pleading in her voice. Yes, I replied. And I'm still your daughter. That ended the conversation. The day of the proceeding arrived clear and cold. The courthouse downtown loomed heavier than I expected. Stone steps, flags snapping in the wind, people moving with purpose. I walked up those steps alone, my file folder tucked under my arm. Inside, the room was full. Not just lawyers and officials, but family members, acquaintances, even a few people from Megan's workplace. This was no longer something whispered about. It was being witnessed. Megan sat at the defendant's table. She wore a tailored suit, but it couldn't hide the tension in her shoulders. When she looked at me, her eyes held something new. Fear. I took my seat when instructed. My lawyer leaned in. Remember, she whispered. Facts. Nothing else. The proceedings began with formalities, then moved quickly into substance. The judge was efficient, unsentimental. He didn't ask how anyone felt. He asked what could be proven. Documents were entered into record. Power of attorney forms. Emails. Bank statements. Insurance confirmations. Dates and signatures aligned on screens for everyone to see. My lawyer presented the timeline slowly, deliberately. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She let the pattern reveal itself. Megan's counsel attempted to frame the issue as consent, as trust, as family arrangement gone sour. The judge listened, then asked one question that shifted the room. Was the plaintiff informed in writing that these transfers were permanent? Silence. Megan's attorney hesitated. Not explicitly, Your Honor. The judge nodded once. Proceed. I was called to testify. I stood, hands folded, and spoke into the microphone. I described the weeks after Daniel's death, the fog, the exhaustion, the way Megan had presented the documents as temporary measures. I described my understanding at the time not as an excuse but as context. Then the judge asked me something directly. Miss Harris, he said, looking at me over his glasses, at the time you signed these documents, did you believe you were giving up your rights permanently? No, I said. My voice didn't shake. I believed I was asking for help. He nodded, made a note, and waved me down. Megan was called next. She took the stand with practiced composure. She spoke of responsibility, of stepping in when no one else would, of managing chaos. Her words were polished, rehearsed. Then my lawyer stood. She didn't challenge Megan's character. She challenged her consistency. She pulled up an email Megan had sent to a colleague weeks after Daniel's death, referencing the assets as fully under my control now. Another message described the situation as resolved. My lawyer turned to the judge. If the intent was temporary assistance, why describe it this way? Megan hesitated. It was shorthand, she said. Informal language. My lawyer nodded. Then why list the assets as your own in professional disclosures? Megan's breath caught. That was a misunderstanding. The judge leaned forward. Multiple misunderstandings, he said, evenly suggest a pattern. The room felt very still. My parents sat behind me. I didn't turn around, but I could feel their presence, heavy, conflicted. This was the first time they were seeing the full picture laid out, stripped of narrative and intention. During a recess, my mother touched my arm. I didn't know, she whispered. I know, I said. Megan didn't look at them. When the proceeding resumed, the judge addressed the core issue. This court is not here to determine sibling dynamics, he said. It is here to determine whether authority was abused. He reviewed the evidence aloud, the timing, the lack of disclosure, the professional benefit derived. Then he looked directly at Megan. Intent matters, he said. But so does impact. The ruling was not final that day. But an interim order was issued, assets frozen, authority suspended, restitution calculations initiated. Megan's shoulders sagged as the words landed. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. Questions flew. I walked past them, again silent. That evening at home, Evan asked if I had gone to work. I went somewhere important, I said. Did you win? He asked. I considered the question. Not yet, I said. But the truth was heard. He nodded, satisfied. That's good. As I tucked him into bed, I thought about the celebrations that had once filled rooms while I mourned quietly. Those rooms were silent now. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was standing alone in them. The weeks between the hearing and the final decision felt longer than the years that came before it. Nothing moved outwardly, yet everything was in motion. Accounts remained frozen. Megan's authority stayed suspended. Lawyers exchanged documents with the quiet efficiency of people who already knew where the truth was heading. Every day I checked my email with measured calm, then closed it and went back to my life. That calm surprised me. Before waiting had felt like drowning, like holding my breath with no idea when air would return. Now it felt different, grounded, as if I had already reclaimed something essential regardless of the outcome. Megan didn't call anymore. She sent one message late one night. We can still fix this. You don't have to destroy everything. I read it once, then forwarded it to my lawyer. I didn't reply. My parents struggled visibly. My mother tried to maintain normal routines, Sunday calls, casual updates, but her voice lacked conviction. My father said little. When he did, it was careful. We should have asked more questions, he admitted once. Yes, I said. Not unkindly, just honestly. The final hearing was scheduled for a Friday morning, open to the public. The judge had made it clear this session would address conclusions and consequences. I slept surprisingly well the night before. At the courthouse, the room was fuller than before. Fewer reporters, more people who mattered, financial auditors, professional oversight, representatives, legal observers. This wasn't about spectacle anymore. It was about record. Megan arrived early. She didn't look at me. The judge entered without ceremony and got straight to it. He summarized the findings methodically, each point building on the last, like steps you couldn't step back down from. He cited the timing of the documents executed within days of a traumatic loss. He cited the lack of written disclosure regarding permanence. He cited the professional benefit Megan had derived by representing those assets as her own. Then he paused. In cases involving family, he said, courts are often asked to weigh trust against formality. But trust does not replace duty, and grief does not erase rights. The words settled heavily in the room. He turned to Megan. You were entrusted with authority, he said, and you exceeded it. Megan's lawyer stood, attempted one final argument that intent had been misunderstood, that family dynamics were complex, that restitution would cause undue harm. The judge listened, then shook his head slightly. Harm has already occurred, he said. The question is whether this court corrects it. He issued the ruling. Restitution was ordered, calculated precisely with interest. Authority was formally revoked. Professional conduct violations were referred to oversight boards for further action. Costs were assigned, not as punishment, as correction. Megan's face drained of color. She gripped the table, as if it were the only thing holding her upright. My lawyer placed a hand lightly on my arm. "It's done," she whispered. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I exhaled. Outside, there were no cameras this time. No shouting. Just people dispersing quietly, their curiosity satisfied, their conclusions drawn. My parents approached me slowly. My mother's eyes filled. "I'm sorry," she said, "for not seeing it sooner." I nodded. "I know." My father swallowed hard. "You were stronger than we realized." I thought of Evan. Of the nights I cried into a pillow. Of the way silence had kept me standing when noise would have shattered me. "I didn't need to be strong," I said. "I needed to be heard." Megan didn't come over. Later at home, I sat at the same dining table where months earlier I had spread out papers in confusion. Now a new envelope lay in front of me, official, stamped final. I didn't open it right away. Evan sat across from me, drawing. "Is it over?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "It is." He looked up. "Did Aunt Megan have to say sorry? I considered that." "No," I said. The truth said enough. That night, after he was asleep, I opened the envelope. The numbers were clear. The path forward was practical. But what mattered more was something no document could measure. I felt steady. For the first time since Daniel died, my life wasn't being managed by someone else's version of what I could handle. It belonged to me again. To us. Justice hadn't arrived loudly. It had arrived correctly. After the ruling, people expected a dramatic aftermath. They expected confrontation, apologies, explosive conversations where everything was finally said out loud. That's how stories usually end. Noise, emotion, resolution packaged neatly for an audience. That isn't what happened. What followed was quieter, and in many ways heavier. The restitution process moved forward efficiently. Funds were returned in stages, overseen by third parties, documented carefully. Numbers corrected. Accounts reopened. What had been taken under the guise of management came back under the clarity of law. But money doesn't travel alone. It brings consequences with it. Megan's professional review concluded within weeks. I didn't attend. I didn't ask for details. I only knew what became public, that her license was suspended, pending further conditions, that her employer formally severed ties, that the career she had built so meticulously now carried a permanent mark. My parents called when they found out. My mother cried. Not loudly, not theatrically, just the quiet crying of someone forced to grieve a version of the future they had believed in. "She says she doesn't know who she is anymore," my mother said. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone pressed to my ear. "I know what that feels like," I said. There was a long pause. "Can you forgive her?" my mother asked. The question didn't make me angry. It didn't hurt. It just felt premature. "I can let go," I said carefully. "Forgiveness is something else." My parents began to change after that. Not dramatically, not all at once, but the dynamic shifted. They stopped speaking in absolutes. They stopped assuming one child's competence meant another's weakness. For the first time, they asked me questions without already believing they knew the answers. My father visited one afternoon to help fix a loose cabinet hinge. We worked side by side in silence for a while. "You didn't fail," he said suddenly. I looked at him. "I know." He nodded, relieved. Megan didn't reach out again. Not directly. I heard through others that she was angry, then devastated, then numb, that she felt betrayed, that she blamed my lawyer, the system, me. I didn't correct those stories. They weren't mine to manage. What surprised me most was how little I wanted to explain myself anymore. For so long I had rehearsed defenses in my head, justifications, the perfect sentence that would finally make people understand why I hadn't fought sooner, why I had stayed silent, why I had endured. Now I didn't need them. The truth had been spoken in a room that mattered, recorded, recognized. That was enough. Evan noticed the change before anyone else. "You're different," he said one night as I tucked him in. "Different how?" I asked. "You don't look tired all the time," he said. I smiled. "I still get tired. But not the heavy kind," he insisted. He was right. The house felt lighter. Not because the past was erased, but because it no longer pressed down on us from every corner. I made plans again, small ones at first. A weekend trip. A savings account labeled clearly, honestly in my own name. At work, I applied for a better position, not because I needed to prove anything, but because I could. When I got the offer, I didn't tell my family right away. I celebrated quietly with Evan takeout on the couch, laughter spilling into the evening without guilt. Months later, Megan and I saw each other for the first time since the ruling. It was at a family event one my parents hosted, cautiously inviting us separately, uncertain how it would go. I arrived early. She arrived late. We didn't speak at first. Then near the end of the night, she approached me. She looked smaller, not physically, something else. As if the certainty she once carried had been stripped away, leaving her unsure how to stand. "I didn't think it would end like this," she said. "I didn't think it would begin like that," I replied. She nodded slowly. "I thought I was helping." I held her gaze. "You were helping yourself." She swallowed. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "I know," I said. "And I did. That didn't change the outcome." We stood there for a moment, suspended between who we had been and who we now were. "I hope you're okay," she said finally. "I am," I answered. And that was the truth. We didn't hug. We didn't reconcile. We didn't pretend. We simply acknowledged reality and walked in separate directions. That night, as I drove home, I thought about all the moments I had stayed silent out of fear. All the times I had mistaken endurance for weakness because that's what others told me it was. I had won nothing in the way people imagine victory. But I had regained something quieter, deeper, my place. The months after everything settled were the first time my life felt truly my own. Not perfect, not untouched by loss, but no longer shaped by other people's expectations of how much I should endure quietly. I didn't announce new beginnings. I didn't post updates or make speeches about resilience. I just lived intentionally, carefully, without apology. Evan started 3rd grade that fall. On the first morning, he insisted on walking into the school by himself. Halfway to the door, he turned back and waved, grinning like he was stepping into something important. I waved back and stayed in my car for a moment after he disappeared inside. There was a time when watching him grow would have broken me because Daniel wasn't there to see it. Now it still hurt, but it didn't hollow me out. Grief had softened into something quieter, something that lived alongside gratitude instead of swallowing it. At work, my promotion came with a modest salary increase and more responsibility. I took it seriously, not because I needed validation, but because I trusted myself again. Every decision I made felt anchored in clarity, not fear. My parents adjusted slowly. They called more often, not to instruct but to ask. My mother asked about Evan's school projects. My father asked my opinion on things small and large. It wasn't dramatic reconciliation. It was recalibration. One evening, my mother said something that stayed with me. "I didn't know silence could be strength," she said. "Neither did I once." Megan remained distant. We saw each other only at unavoidable family events, and even then, sparingly. She spoke less, listened more. I didn't know what lessons she was learning, only that they were no longer mine to teach. I didn't feel triumphant about that. I felt free. One night, months later, Evan asked a question that took me by surprise. "Mom," he said, lying on his back on the living room floor, staring at the ceiling, "were you scared when you talked to the judge?" I thought about it. About the courtroom, the documents, the weight of being believed. "Yes," I said. "I was. But you did it anyway," he said. "Yes." Why? I considered my answer carefully. "Because sometimes being scared means you're finally telling the truth." He nodded, absorbing that. "I'm glad you did." So was I. The truth is, justice didn't change who I was. It revealed who I had been all along. I had survived loss without applause. I had carried grief without permission. I had stayed quiet not because I was weak, but because I was trying to hold everything together with dignity. And when the moment came when the truth needed a voice, I didn't raise it in anger. I raised it in fact. That was enough. I used to think being overlooked meant being invisible. Now I know better. It means people underestimated the weight of your silence. And sometimes that silence becomes the loudest thing in the room when it finally chooses to stand. I don't know where Megan's life will lead her. I don't know how my parents will continue to make sense of the past. What I do know is this: my child watched me stand up without shouting, without cruelty, without revenge. He learned that dignity doesn't need permission, and that justice doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it arrives with a single sentence. spoken softly, and finally heard. If there's one thing this journey taught me, it's that being quiet doesn't mean agreeing, and enduring doesn't mean surrendering. There are seasons in life when survival looks like silence, when speaking feels impossible, and strength is measured not by how loudly you fight but by how carefully you keep going. That kind of strength isn't admired, it isn't celebrated, but it is real. Justice doesn't always come when you ask for it. Sometimes it waits until you are ready to receive it without bitterness, without needing to destroy someone else to reclaim yourself. I didn't win because I was louder. I didn't win because I was smarter. I won because the truth stayed intact while everything else tried to rewrite it. And when it finally stood in the light, it didn't need my anger to defend it. If this story made you reflect on a moment when you were overlooked, misunderstood, or quietly enduring something no one else saw, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe that even the quietest voices deserve to be heard, consider subscribing. Some stories don't shout, they stand.